Political parties part 3. Let's go. Fourth party system. Republicans do really well. Really well from the early 1900s until the 1932 election. The 1932 election was all about the Great Depression and stock market crash, obviously. So, the 1922 stock market crash, that was Herbert Hoover as a Republican. So, the Democrats won big at the polls in 1932. FDR, Hyde Park, New York. FDR created the New Deal Coalition. You guys remember, the coalition is a group of diverse interests. Democrats maintain a majority, sometimes slightly, to this day. Now, if you look at members of political parties in America, there's more registered Democrats. I know Republicans have the Senate and the House. I know they have the presidency. I know currently in 2017 they control 30 governorships, a lot of state legislatures, but there's more registered Democrats because, those are the numbers, but they're disproportionately outweighed by the Republicans because of the Electoral College and stuff. So you have a whole bunch of people in New York and California that have X amount of votes, and a whole bunch of people in, say, Wyoming or Montana, and those votes get disproportionately counted at a higher level. Fifth party system, New Deal, coalition, unifying those interests, diverse amount of interests, all coming together. Races, ethnicities, religions, geographical locations. Saying, FDR, help us make some legislation, help us out. What you gonna do? 1935 Wagner Act, Social Security Administration, unemployment insurance, the Fair Labor Standards Act, aka the minimum wage. What happened though in the 50s and 60s? Well, that New Deal coalition began to fall apart. The Democrats started splitting between the Northern Democrats and then the Southern Democrats, the Dixiecrats. And I talked about this when we did civil rights. That the Northern Democrats started supporting civil rights because they have black people in their districts because of the Great Migration. And then the Southern Democrats, who were just racist, wanted segregation and did not want civil rights. Dixiecrats, 1964 election. Check it out. So this is the beginning of the South moving to the Republican side. Okay, so traditionally, Democrat has been the party of the South, and now it's 100% Republican. So I got Eisenhower right there. That's 1957 Civil Rights Bill. There's Strom Thurmond, and this was the longest filibuster. You know what a filibuster is? The minority party in the Senate blocking a vote by extending debate. Strom Thurmond set the record for the longest Senate filibuster in U.S. history. 24 hours straight this dude was talking. That's insane. John McCain would definitely fall asleep. This man falls asleep at the State of the Union. It's like an hour long. There's Janet Napolitano. She fell asleep. I forget what speech that is. But there's Rahm Emanuel. For Janet Napolitano, she was former Secretary of Department of Homeland Security. It's okay. You get tired, you fall asleep during something while somebody's talking. Hey, wake up. Okay, Republicans form a coalition of, and this is the modern Republican Party, affluent economic conservatives, and then middle lower class social conservatives, aka the Christian right. So Republicans trying to get social conservatives, Christians trying to vote and Christians to vote to counterbalance the likelihood of the poor voting Democrat. So that's the Republican coalition. Okay, this is two diverse interests. You have affluent economic conservatives that could care less about social issues. They just want no taxes and no regulation. That's what they want. And then you have a bunch of Christian conservatives that are very concerned about social issues, including like gay marriage or legalization of drugs or prostitution or abortion, and don't really care too much about tax policy and regulation. So those two groups overlap to create the modern Republican Party. Currently, how Democrats and Republicans try to get votes, well, it's all about the economy. I mean, Bill Clinton said that in the 90s. He said, it's the economy, stupid. So every party now says, hey, we got the best idea for the economy. We're going to put people to work. No, we're going to do it. No, we're going to do it. So they argue about who's going to do better on the economy. That's the number one issue. How else do they do it? Well, 90-something%, I think it's 98%, of ads, political ads, are negative. They want you to think the other guy is a monster, except for Teach Out. Nuclear bombs and mushroom clouds. I mean, Myth the Ripper, right? We watched that Super PAC ad by Stephen Colbert. How else do they do it? Connect with short-term voters by having likable candidates and talk about issues that affect the voter. So they're taking the pulse of public opinion. They want to know what people are talking about. And Democrats in particular, they're always trying to get the poor vote. Sometimes they really care about the poor. Other times they're just trying to get the poor vote. And you really got to watch their policy rather than just what they say. Okay, the party conventions. This is where members of a party go to a city to hold a convention to elect a nominee for president to represent their party. The longest convention in American history was the 1924 Democratic Convention, when delegates took 17 days and 103 ballots to nominate John Davis. Convention rules often contributed to such deadlock. The first presidential primaries were actually held in 1912, but primaries were almost meaningless. They returned really in the 70s, 1972 to be specific. By the 1930s, many states had actually repealed primary laws. Making them useless. Okay, primaries and caucuses. Pay attention. Early 1970s. Pay attention. This is big. This is our modern system. Primaries and caucuses is how modern parties determine what delegates should be sent to the National Convention. Way before the convention, states hold primaries and caucuses. Why do they do that? Well, it's all about the 1968 Democratic National Convention. 1968, the Democrat Party was divided. Senators Eugene McCarthy, Robert F. Kennedy had entered the campaign in March, challenging then incumbent LBJ for the Democratic nomination. LBJ, though, dropped out of the race in March. Vice President Hubert Humphrey then entered into the race, but did not compete in any of the primaries, compiling his delegates in caucus states that were controlled by party leaders. After Kennedy's assassination, that's June 5th, 1968, the Democrat Party's divisions grew. And at the moment of Kennedy's death, the delegate count stood Humphrey at 561, Kennedy 393, McCarthy at 258. Kennedy's murder left his delegates uncommitted. Makes sense. When it came to choosing a candidate, one side, that's McCarthy, they were decidedly anti-war. This is during the Vietnam War. So McCarthy was against the war. Humphrey, however, was more, because he was vice president, so he was more towards Johnson, like continuing the Vietnam War. 80% of the primary voters had been anti-war candidates. The delegates had the delegate count based on the party selection had Humphrey in the lead. So this all went down in 1968 in Chicago. The mayor of Chicago, Richard Daley, was his name, was trying to pull scenes for Johnson and Humphrey behind the scenes, pull strings for him. So there were all kinds of protests around the Democratic convention in Chicago. I'm descending upon Chicago. I don't know if you see that, but in the picture as I narrate this story. So Richard Daley led a violent police crackdown on the protesters. These were the McCarthy supporters outside the convention in 1968. And here are some pictures. So this was broadcast on the evening news. This really fractured the Democrat Party in 68 and allowed for Richard Nixon to win pretty big. So after this, 68, Democrats learned their lesson. So they said, you know what, we're going to have primaries and caucuses from now on, and the Republicans followed suit. So this really, it was the shift from the party machine to the parties of the people, or the states. So state parties having more power, voters within a state having more power, rather than the Democrat or Republican National Party kind of selecting candidates. There's more power to the voters of the states, which is what you want. I mean, that's democracy. Let the people choose, let the people decide. So Democrat and Republican parties began to all require states hold either primaries or caucuses for nomination purposes. Winner take all was scrapped in most cases, and proportional delegate counts began. So if you win a state, you can win a percentage of the delegates. If you lose a state, you can still win a percentage of the delegates. Primaries and caucuses led to increased power at the state party level. A main goal for the reconfiguring was also to increase voter participation. Really hasn't happened, but that was one of the goals. Conventions are now dominated by candidate enthusiasts. Delegates simply confirm the results of the primary election. So you can see, like in the background there's the primary season. We're talking about February, March, April, May, June, and then you have the general election in November. So you're talking about months and months. That's primary season. So the primary after primary, caucus after caucus, delegates are getting attributed to the different candidates. And then come convention time, you already know who's going to get that party's nomination. There's RFK. I had him up. He left though. Okay, Iowa. These are the things that Iowa is famous for. Nothing. And then being the first presidential caucus state. So they're the first state in the union. This is where the presidents all have to start their campaigns and go to Iowa and talk about corn. Blah, 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 blah. Buffalo Bill. Other states want to get ahead of Iowa or move their state up in the primary and caucus season, because if your state is late in the primary season, it's almost like no one cares because you already know who's going to win. And that process, trying to have your state move up to the top of the primary caucus calendar, that process is called front loading. So right now it's Iowa and then New Hampshire. So we choose our presidents by their, quote, telegenic smile and their willingness to utter platitudes in southwest Nowheresville 2 years before the election. Hello, Iowa. Thus ends part 3.